young son, Ben Portnoy, on the show, Sports Business Journal. And Ben, I received a word. I know you're a big journalist now. I know you're a big source guy. I had a source tell me you were supposed to be the fourth with Trump, Sankey, and Bevilacqua out there on the golf course, but President Trump didn't want any part of you on the course. Can you confirm or deny?
I will neither confirm or deny. I'll plead the fifth on that one. But
well
they didn't. I guess that they didn't want the extra challenge, I suppose.
All right, you know me. You know I love college football, but you know the business of college football. I leave that to you. I'm not a huge fan of it. So let's talk about this settlement that's come down from the courts as best you can. As if you were talking to a fifth grader, what has happened and what has changed in college football in the last 3-4 days?
Yeah, so I think the super simple way to describe this, and obviously this is really in the weeds, and a lot of people's eyes glaze over when they, start to hear about the settlement.
I'm one of them.
I think the short version is that for basically 100 years, college athletes have been said, hey, you can't be paid, and universities, you can't pay athletes. Well, now with this settlement, we've basically shifted to a model that will say schools, you can pay athletes directly, and there will be this new enforcement group to oversee that you follow those rules related to that. And that's pretty much the one sentence, like fifth grade explanation of the House settlement.
Explain to me why it's good for Mississippi State and Ole Miss, and then why is it bad for them?
So I think, and it applies both to Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and I think just broadly in college sports, right? Like the biggest problem, if you want to call it that, for college athletics right now is that you don't have any rules, right? So like I use this example all the time where like the 49ers and the Dolphins don't play by different salary cap rules because they're in California and Florida, right? Like, but essentially college sports is playing that way because of state laws and how they operate and all of that. What this does, at least on paper, and we'll see whether it holds up in court because people are probably going to get sued more because of this, but essentially the idea is that like you're creating a baseline blueprint for the structure of how a salary cap essentially could be put in place, of how penalties might be enforced if you try to circumvent that or cheat or whatever that might be. And I think those are kind of like that's the structure, and that's what they want out of this. And I think in theory, that's a good thing for college sports because it standardizes things. It creates, again, a level playing field, if you want to call it that, right? The problem, and I think this has been the problem for a long time, is that, the NCAA continues to lose in court, generally speaking. And I think that, this is not set up by the NCAA. This is set up by a judge and a federal court. And I think that's a big distinction, right? Like, I think something that I think people don't necessarily realize when it comes to like NCAA investigations for years, right? Like the Miami cases in the 2000s come to mind. Like, the NCAA didn't have subpoena power. They can't walk up to your door and say, hey, you got to talk to me or you're going to go to prison, basically, right?
Right.
This is set out by a federal judge. So the rules they have subpoena power. They have the ability to actually penalize. Again, it's set out by a federal court. So they have a little bit more, I guess, jurisdiction maybe is the best word. But that said, again, sort of the problem for it, whether you're Ole Miss, Mississippi State or whoever, I think is that these things are going to get challenged, right? Like if I'm a Mississippi State football player and I'm getting a $500,000 NIL deal and you tell me to file that to this clearinghouse and they say, hey, that's not kosher, figure out a new deal. I'm probably going to sue and I may win. And then we go around and around and around in kind of the way we are now. So I think, again, until it's challenged, and it will be challenged almost certainly, I'm still a little skeptical, but I think if it does hold, again, the good thing, if this does hold and does work, like it gives a blueprint for some standardization. And that's, I think, a really good thing. And a lot of administrators would tell you the same thing.
So you talked about a salary cap, in the NFL and MLB and NBA, those are collectively bargained. The players have a voice there. This was not given with any voice to the players, hence why we think the lawsuits are going to come. When those lawsuits come, how close are we to the point where the universities have to give in and say, we've got to let these guys unionize, we'll consider them employees, and we go forward from there?
So I think there's sort of two prongs to this, and I'm definitely not a employment lawyer, despite
you're not lawyers here. No.
I may be cosplaying a lawyer these days with all this stuff going on.
Let Sokoloff handle that.
That's right. The firm of Sokoloff and Portnoy would do really well, I think. But I think the reality is there's kind of two prongs to this, is that employment is complicated in that a lot of administrators will tell you that they don't want employment because you have a lot of different state laws, kind of like what we're experiencing right now. Like there's different NIL laws, right? A lot of states have different employment laws. Same kind of thing where certain campuses have unions related to university employees, things like that. Like that becomes a complicating factor. Again, also, like you're also not like, do schools want to start paying a 401k for their third string center? Like, things like that, right? Like that's a financial incentive, right? Or a financial burdens, for lack of a better term. So there's that piece of it. Now, as far as like what actually needs to happen, I think that a lot of people will tell you that they're hoping that because the settlement has passed, because there's some backing there by a federal court, that Congress will step in and create some kind of legislation that would basically standardize NIL laws and say, hey, here's kind of the rules of the road. It would take what is basically spelled out in the House settlement and codify it into law, because the settlement, for those of us non-legal minds here, right, the settlement is technically for 10 years and it stays in place for 10 years. But what a federal law would do would obviously be more than that, and sort of as long as needed, right? And so in perpetuity, I guess, is maybe the best way. And so that's kind of the two prongs to this, is that I think there's a significant cost to schools of why employment. They don't necessarily want it, but I think they need federal legislation in order to find a way to your point, collectively bargain and bring everyone to the table without making them employees, because technically federal law says you have to be an employee in order to collectively bargain, and that varies a little bit by state, but that's generally the perception. So again, you kind of need, there's a couple of layers to it, but I do think you're right. Like I think at some point, like collective bargaining is kind of the only way out of this.
What are the next steps the schools are looking to implement? Because we've been talking about the wild, wild west for quite a while here. I don't know that you can ever get all the genies back into the lamp at any point with this, but I do think there are ways to maybe calm down the transfer portal a little bit, calm down NIL a little bit, that in a way that still benefits everybody. What do the schools want to do next?
Well, I think like the big thing is sort of what I said, right? Like there's going to be an enforcement arm. Now, whether that enforcement arm holds through challenges to it in the legal system, like we'll see. I think that's the really hard thing, and you won't know that until it gets challenged, and it will almost certainly get challenged sooner than later. Because God knows if anyone's getting rich off any of this, it's the lawyers. But
and lawyers are raking in money off the NCAA recently.
For all of this, like I really should have gone to law school, man. I don't know what we all decided, but I think that so there's going to be challenges to it, and whether the system holds, that's a big question. As far as what schools want to do, I mean, frankly, the schools want that to hold, but what the schools also need, I think, and want is some level of structure, because like the NCAA hasn't been able to enforce any rules because they keep getting sued, they lose in court, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that if they can hold and they can create these rules around the salary cap, and they do stand up to like legal muster, then you're going to have a chance to really create a system that is sustainable, I think, and not, this quote unquote wild, wild west. It creates, I guess, some transparency. It creates some stability, all of those things.
Just a couple of minutes left, Ben. When we think about college football and the business of it at this time, it's never made more money than it's making right now. The ratings are as high as they've ever been. And yet there's still this perception that the sport is in danger. When you think about college football and just the general health of the sport, somebody's wrong there. Either some people are saying the sport is dying, or there are people who are saying the sport's never been more popular. Which one is it to you?
I think the answer is yes. I do think it is twofold. And this may be a little bit of a cop out, but I do think it is kind of two things, right? Like I think that yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. Like college football has never been more popular. Viewership is at all-time highs. All of those things. Like that's there's never been more money in the sport. Obviously, that's really great. What I do think is hard, and I think where you do run the risk of disenfranchising fans and, seeing people say like, hey, I'm good. Like, I think the transfer portal, for example, is like a really hard thing. And I don't see that because it's not good that athletes have the freedom to, like, I think that's actually like valid. And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like think about anything, right? Like I can take another job any day if I want to, and I'm not like limited by it of some other rule or regulation. Now, if you have a contract in place, separate issue, whatever. But I think that when you come to the portal and the turnover, and I think you see it honestly in college basketball is the harder piece than even college football. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it makes it hard for fans to keep up, right? Like, think about it this way. Like, if I'm, Joe Bulldog fan and I want to go and buy a jersey for the starting quarterback at Mississippi State, am I going to spend $130 or $150 when that guy might be gone in 4 months just because like you got a better deal somewhere else? Like, I don't know. Whereas like if you're in the NFL, a guy gets drafted, like, they're going to be there 4 or 5 years, right? Like because of the rookie contract and things like that. So I think there's inherent challenges with that I think make it hard, where I do think, yes, college football is immensely popular, but I think the turnover is really hard. And it's funny. This is kind of anecdotal, but I talked to my mom about this, and she grew up a huge Dolphins fan, grew up in Fort Lauderdale, and she was telling this. She was like, yeah, like I loved the NFL, loved watching football. And it's, this is dating her, I suppose, but she was like, I remember when free agency came into play and it became harder to track the team because you didn't know who was on the dang team every year a little bit. And I think it was obviously a very different circumstance, but I think there's something to that, to college sports. And I think that's where you run the risk of alienating people. And I do think, like, honestly, like, I do think some people have been alienated. And I think it's a mix of both things, but I think that's where you have the sort of negative piece of it, if that makes sense.
I feel smarter already. Ben Portnoy, Sports Business Journal, man. Appreciate your time, buddy.
Anytime, man. Thanks for having me.